clear your desk." The word slapped the room harder than the time Jared called security on Gary for microwaving salmon. Only this time it was directed at me, and it wasn't just the tone, it was the way he said it. Like I was something rotting in the fridge he didn't want to touch. "My name's Linda. I'm 48. I've been at West Elm Systems longer than Jared's been legally allowed to drink. I onboarded our flagship $50 million Axiomex contract, while this smug little bastard was probably still doing Jaeger shots off a dorm toilet. And now I was being fired in front of 3 junior analysts, a fresh intern from Purdue, and a half-eaten birthday cake still sitting on the breakroom table with "Congrats, Brian," written in passive-aggressive pink frosting. It started with a surprise performance review that wasn't on my calendar. Jared, who only started showing up to the office 3 months ago after marrying the CEO's daughter and slithering his way into a VP of Ops title, said it was routine. Like getting hit by a bus is routine. I walked into the conference room with my laptop and notebook like a professional. I walked out with my spine straight, face calm, dignity held together with frayed dental floss. "Your attitude has been undermining team cohesion," Jared said, scrolling through what I swear was just a blank Google Doc. "You've resisted my directives and failed to demonstrate loyalty to the current leadership vision." Translation: I had the audacity to ask why he approved a new vendor onboarding form with 2 different tax ID numbers and a fake address in Arkansas. I didn't even say it in front of anyone, I emailed him privately. His response: "Schedule this circus and throw me under the moving company bus." "I've given this a lot of thought," he added, adjusting his little leather wrist cuff like he just bench pressed a principal. "We're moving in a new direction. You're not part of that." The intern gasped. "I didn't. I just asked, would you like me to begin transition documentation?" That's when he snapped. His voice shot up like a high school coach on steroids. "No, just clear your desk." For full 3 seconds, no one moved. Not even the HVAC buzzed. Jared stood there, chest puffed, waiting for me to cry, beg, yell, something he could weaponize. But all I did was close my laptop. "Okay," I said, that was it. No tears, no speech, no Jerry Maguire moment, just okay. I walked out of the room, past rows of gaping mouths and blinking Slack statuses, and turned the corner toward my office. Grabbed my coffee mug, unplugged the charger I paid for myself, and tossed my nameplate in the recycling bin because even my own name didn't belong in this place anymore. Then I pulled out my phone. The protocol was simple: company policy. Not sabotage, not revenge, just a procedure designed for operational stability. It's called vendor failover. If a key signatory leaves, whether they die, resign, or get canned like expired tuna, you trigger the protocol to ensure compliance continuity. It's buried in the Operations Continuity Guide, page 47, second paragraph. I tapped the app, two-factor authenticated, entered my code. Vendor primary signatory, role cleared escalation tree initiated account, Axum 50078 client, Axiomex status, pending verification done. It took 15 seconds. I didn't hack anything. I didn't delete files. I just followed the rules, the ones I helped write, because I wasn't just a project manager. I was a registered operational signatory for our largest client. But Jared didn't know that. Jared didn't know anything, really. He thought leadership meant speaking in hashtags and ending every meeting with "Let's crush Q4." The man once asked if compliance chain logic was a gym term. I walked out without saying goodbye to anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I could already feel the whispers spreading. Because I knew if I looked any of them in the eye, I might shatter. This wasn't just about losing a job. It was about being publicly humiliated by a legacy-humping nepotism puppet in front of kids I mentored through their first month of onboarding. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, eyes on the cracked windshield I'd been meaning to fix. My face was calm. My lungs were tight. Somewhere under my skin, a scream was crawling, and my phone vibrated. One new system alert. Vendor primary signatory role cleared, payment verification pending. I stared at the message, the white text glowing soft against the dark mode background. That's when I smiled. Not a big, cinematic smile, just a twitch at the corner of my mouth. Because Jared may have kicked me out of the building, but he had no idea what he'd just unplugged. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the ache in my chest had settled into something colder. Not grief, not panic, just this heavy quiet like the air before a thunderclap. I live in a 2-bedroom ranch-style house on the edge of town, the kind of place with hydrangeas in the front and a bird feeder that only attracts squirrels. It was mine, paid off. And unlike Jared's downtown condo with its monthly HOA drama and curated fake plants, my home didn't lie to me. I set my keys in the bowl by the door, poured myself half a glass of boxed wine, and booted up the old laptop I'd used for remote days. Company property was already in the trunk, along with my resignation letter they didn't bother asking for. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was cleaning. First, I opened up my backup drive, pulled in the vendor contact lists, timeline spreadsheets, and procedural documentation I'd built from scratch when Axiomex came aboard. None of it confidential. None of it stolen. Just the bones of a system I helped create, bones I refused to let rot in that toxic zoo. I checked Slack, already deactivated. My name replaced by former user. It was like being digitally cremated. Then I moved to my admin tokens, cloud access, vendor dashboards, compliance portals, all linked through a personal authenticator they asked me to use for added security. Jared probably thought passwords were a suggestion. Each unlink felt like unplugging a machine from life support. By the time I hit the final dashboard, the message blinked, "You are no longer authorized to access this environment." And just like that, the last thread snapped. I was out, fully, cleanly, legally. My email, though, still forwarded alerts to my backup inbox. And as I sat on my porch watching the neighbor's cat attempt homicide on a blue jay, it pinged. Vendor primary signatory role cleared payment verification pending account. AXM 50,078. There it was. The script doing its job just like I trained it to. I didn't gloat. I didn't laugh. I just closed my eyes and took a slow breath through my nose. This wasn't revenge. This was protocol. If you're removed from a key account, the system flags the transition. If no replacement is certified within 24 hours, the account goes into pending status until both internal and client-side approvals are reconciled. It's slow bureaucracy designed for safety, not sabotage. But that's the thing with people like Jared. They step over cables they don't understand and wonder why the lights go out. Back at the office, so I'd hear later, Jared was holding court like a third-string quarterback who just got handed the team. "The old guard is gone," he said, like he personally slayed a dragon. "We're modernizing now, streamlining." What he was actually doing was prepping a PowerPoint for next week's board review with a template he downloaded from Canva and filled with phrases like paradigm synergy and unlocking legacy bottlenecks. I know because Mandy from payroll texted me a screenshot of slide 4, titled Cultural Detox. My photo was still on it. Meanwhile, he was too busy sipping his own ego to notice the mild alarm bells starting to ring in the accounting department. Mild for now. At 3:17 p.m., the first soft error landed in the finance system. Wire transfer rejected, authorization mismatch. That Axiomex payment, $4.2 million in quarterly prepayments, bounced like a rubber check at a Vegas blackjack table. But Jared, he brushed it off. Told the junior finance associate to refresh the dashboard and blamed legacy systems. Said it was probably just IT lag. The CFO was out sick with the flu. The controller was on a 2-week cruise in Alaska. And the only other person who might have caught at me was sitting in leggings on my porch, watching the world tilt one quiet degree at a time. By dinner time, I'd microwaved a frozen lasagna, poured another glass of wine, and skimmed through old notes on Axiomex's contract. It wasn't about curiosity. It was about closure. I needed to remember what I'd built, what we'd protected, and what Jared just walked into with both eyes shut and no helmet. Axiomex wasn't just a whale account, it was a damn ecosystem. Their vendor onboarding requirements made Fort Knox look like a self-checkout lane. Every signatory had to be registered with the bank. Every change required dual confirmation. Every role transition had to be backed by a 3-person authorization chain, one of which had to be me, until I wasn't. By 8 p.m., the second system alert hit. Payment verification failed, no active signatory on record. AXM 50,078 escalation queue activated. I leaned back and exhaled through my teeth. It was beginning. Not a fire. Not yet. But a whiff of smoke that would drift into every corridor of West Elm by morning. The funny part? I didn't even want to hurt them. I didn't. I just wanted out with my name intact. But Jared, in his blind little power trip, had kicked the load-bearing wall of the house I helped build. And now the structure creaked. I sat on my porch, watching the streetlight flicker, listening to crickets hum over the dull whir of a distant lawnmower. Somewhere inside me, knot began to loosen. Not joy, not triumph. Just the bitter comfort of knowing that if you plant a tripwire, and they choose to dance blindfolded, what happens next isn't on you. It's on them. The first person to notice anything wrong wasn't Jared. It was Tanya in accounting, a woman so sharp she once caught a decimal point error in a vendor invoice that saved the company $18,000 and a potential lawsuit. She was cross-checking payment verifications for month-end reconciliations when the red flag blinked. Wire transfer rejected, code 718.04 signatory mismatch, client, Axiomex, amount $4,243,000. She blinked, refreshed the page, and stared again. This wasn't a typo. The system had auto-kicked the payment back to Axiomex's bank with a flag that screamed noncompliance in a language only finance people could fully appreciate. Tanya checked the logs. The signature chain had been broken. There was no one with proper authorization currently on record. She flagged it in the internal chat. Tanya M. At Ops Axiomex transfer rejected. Getting 718.04 error. Can someone confirm who the primary signatory is right now? Jared replied 10 minutes later, not to Tanya, not even in the same thread. He posted in the general channel, Jared M. Everyone chill, some legacy roles got cleared when we adjusted ops access. IT says it's just a caching issue. Probably a sync lag. Let's not turn a molehill into a volcano, okay? No at Tanya, no follow-up, no resolution, and no one pushed back. Because the CFO, Frank, was still down with that flu that had knocked him out cold. The guy hadn't logged into his email since Tuesday. The controller, Melissa, was currently off-grid somewhere on a glacier cruise in Alaska, posting scenic photos with bad captions like "Ice, Ice, Baby Snowflake, #Restinghard." Jared's little inner circle, made up of guys who all looked like they met in the same mediocre MBA group project, nodded along in meetings. One even repeated Jared's caching issue line verbatim like it meant something. The junior staff didn't know better. The seniors were too checked out or distracted. And that's how it begins, doesn't it? Not with an explosion, with a flicker on a screen that no one wants to acknowledge. Meanwhile, I was sitting at a cafe on the east side, sipping an iced tea and nibbling on a ham and Swiss sandwich that had too much mayo, catching up with Ray, an old friend from compliance who left Westhelm 2 years ago after a nervous breakdown Jared's predecessor caused. We'd seen things. Survived audits, vendor meltdowns, system migrations that should have come with hazard pay. Ray looked better now, happier. I envied that. You were on Axiomex, right? He asked between bites of a giant pickle. That account was your baby. I took a long sip of tea and shrugged. I had a roll. Why? He held up his phone. Someone I know said the payment bounced. They're freaking out internally. Something about access chain mismatches. I smiled, not wide, not smug, just enough to let it settle in my cheekbones. I'm not there anymore, Ray, I know, but you were the signatory, weren't you? I didn't answer. I just wiped my hands on a napkin and changed the subject. We talked about his garden, his cat that hates Zoom calls, the time his neighbor backed into his mailbox and then offered him a joint as an apology. Anything but the thing we both knew was unraveling a few blocks away from where we sat in the sun. Because here's the truth people like Jared never understand. Operations is made of bones. Quiet, ugly, unsexy bones. Not shiny presentations or vision decks or reorg slogans. It's procedure, compliance, timing. The right button pushed at the right second, or the whole thing collapses under its own weight. The clause, the one buried in the Axiomex contract, it was there. It had always been there. Section 7B, third page after the indemnity language. Any removal or change to registered vendor signatories must be submitted in writing, signed by both parties, and acknowledged by the Axiomex vendor risk officer. Failure to comply will result in immediate suspension of all payment activity until reauthorization is complete. But no one was looking at contracts. They were too busy playing corporate cosplay while the wires snapped beneath them. Back at HQ, Jared was still prepping his board presentation. The theme this time was momentum over legacy. He practiced it with his assistant, pacing around the office like some Silicon Valley prince, spouting phrases like data-forward innovation and streamlining for scale. No one told him that the largest client account had entered dormant status in the system. No one told him that the bank had pinged legal twice for verification and been ignored. No one told him that a second error flag had tripped in the vendor payment system, this time triggering an internal escalation to a mailbox that no longer routed to me. I saw the chain because one of the junior ops kids, bless her nervous little heart, forwarded it to my personal email. "I think this is yours," she'd written. "They forgot to disable the alert routing. Sorry if that's weird." I read the message, closed the email, and looked out the window. It was quiet. The kind of quiet you get right before the glass starts to crack. The morning started like any other. I watered the succulents in my windowsill, ate a piece of dry toast I didn't really want, and set the kettle to boil. My inbox had a few spam newsletters, a pharmacy coupon I didn't remember signing up for, and one message with no subject line, just a Zoom link and 2 words from my old coworker, Kara, "You'll want this." I stared at it for a second, the kettle humming behind me. Then I clicked. It was the kind of meeting I'd sat in on dozens of times, back when my badge still opened doors. Same polished oak table, same branded water bottles with labels no one ever peeled, same forced smiles stretched across faces that hadn't had a real night's sleep in weeks. But this time, I wasn't in a blazer at that table. I was in a hoodie in my kitchen, watching on mute with a chipped mug in my hand. The invite had gone out late last night, 3:42 a.m. According to the header, marked urgent, Axiomex Council Meeting Contractual Breach Review. That kind of language doesn't come from assistants. It comes from lawyers. And when lawyers send 3 a.m. invites to the CEO, you know something's about to split open. Jared didn't know, he hadn't been copied. He wasn't in the waiting room. His little corner of the world still smelled like cologne and ego and PowerPoint slides. At 9 a.m. sharp, the meeting began. The CEO, Gregory Milson, man who once asked me to explain what a net 30 payment term was, looked like he hadn't slept either. His tie was crooked, and his usual smug calm had been replaced with this twitchy, tight-lipped expression that reminded me of a kid who just got called into the principal's office and knew damn well why. The room had 5 people physically present and another 4 dialing in from God knows where. Legal, finance, compliance, and center screen. Axiomex's corporate counsel, a man named Reed Kaplan I'd met once during an onboarding call. He had a voice like smooth granite and the kind of stare that could shave your self-worth down to toothpicks. The kind of guy who doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't need to. The contract talks for him. The meeting started with pleasantries because corporate theater demands you smile before you stab. Then Reed spoke. There was a payment rejection yesterday, he said, like he was reading a weather report. Our internal systems flagged the wire as unverified due to a missing authorized signatory. The CFO, back from sick leave and still pale as flour, nodded like his head was too heavy. Yes, we're aware there was a temporary credentialing issue. Reed raised one finger. Temporary, the signatory on record was removed. There was no replacement form, no signature transfer, no written notice of change. Gregory's voice cracked. Our operations lead transitioned out this week. It was unexpected. Linda Maddox, Reed said. My name sounded like a trigger. We have her listed as the primary operational signatory since 2019. A silence. Gregory shifted in his chair. She's no longer with the company. Reed didn't flinch. Did she resign? Another silence. She was terminated, Gregory said, clearly regretting every syllable as it passed his lips. I leaned back in my chair, letting the steam from my tea fog my glasses for a moment. My fingers didn't twitch. My heart didn't race. I was just listening, watching, waiting to see if they would take responsibility or keep digging. Reed continued, voice smooth as ever. Section 7B of our agreement requires mutual signatory changes be submitted in writing, with counter-approval. As of this morning, our legal department has not received any such documentation, which means the signatory change was made unilaterally. That constitutes a breach. The word hung in the air, breach, not a suggestion, not a concern, a fact. Gregory opened his mouth to speak again, but Reed kept going. We've halted the next scheduled payment pending internal review. Our audit team is preparing a full inquiry. If your team fails to correct this within 72 hours, Clause 11F becomes actionable. I didn't have to look it up. I'd helped write the internal brief on that clause. It gave Axiomex the right to freeze all payments, audit the partnership, and even reevaluate the entire vendor relationship. It was the nuclear option. From the corner of the screen, I watched someone, probably from Westhelm's legal team, begin to furiously type. Reed didn't even glance at them. Then something interesting happened. The door opened behind Gregory and Jared walked in, clearly unaware of the context. Hair too styled, shirt one button too low, holding his tablet like a prop. He walked in mid-sentence, sat down next to Gregory and started whispering. Gregory didn't look at him. Reed did. And who is this? Jared Munro, Gregory said with a slight wince. VP of Operations. Reed nodded once. The same person who authorized the personnel transition? Gregory didn't answer. Reed folded his hands. Then I suggest Mr. Munro refrain from commentary until internal counsel has reviewed this matter. Jared opened his mouth, probably to say something glib or defensive or just plain dumb, but Gregory raised a hand, half warning, half surrender. Jared, he said quietly, step outside. Jared froze. It was the first time I'd seen his mouth truly close. He left without a word. The call continued for another 20 minutes. Action items were assigned. Legal was to compile all internal communications regarding my termination. Finance would deliver logs of all signatory changes. Compliance would initiate an emergency review of all high-value accounts. And I muted the tab and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the steam rising from my mug curling like smoke in the morning light. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't celebrating. I was just watching. Watching them realize what they broke. It brought everyone in this time. No more compartmentalized panic, no more whispers in glass-walled conference rooms. This was the full executive board, tight-lipped, bleary-eyed, and barely caffeinated, dialed into a Zoom call titled Axiomex, Payment Rejection and Contractual Remediation Executive Session. And despite the urgency stitched into every word of that title, the waiting room timer ticked on for 2 long minutes before the guest of honor appeared. When Reed Kaplan's face finally lit up the screen, no one spoke. The man didn't need a dramatic entrance. He just adjusted his collar, blinked once like a python assessing a room full of field mice, and greeted them with the same tone you'd use to ask someone to explain why there's blood on the rug. Thank you for assembling so quickly, he said. This won't take long. The CEO, Gregory, tried to muster that trademark executive smile, one he usually reserves for investors and golf course charity events, but it wilted on impact. He looked more like a man who'd just realized he left the stove on in a house made of gasoline. Reed clicked something off-screen. A document populated the Zoom window, a single page, stamped and highlighted, with a redacted wire record and 2 lines of legal text. Our payment, Reed began calmly, was rejected yesterday morning at 9:14 a.m. Wire was initiated, routed, and returned by the bank citing authorization mismatch. He paused, letting that statement settle. Now, under the terms of our agreement, specifically Section 7B, all changes to vendor-side signatories must be submitted in writing, acknowledged by both parties, and countersigned by a representative from our vendor risk office. Gregory swallowed. Yes, we're reviewing that now. There seems to have been a miscommunication. Reed ignored the lifeline. His eyes scanned the digital room slowly, like he was memorizing every expression. Then, without raising his voice, he asked, per your agreement, who authorized the removal of a primary account signatory? That was the moment. The sentence that split the air like a bolt cracking down the center of a clear sky. Everyone flinched internally. Not because it was shouted, Reed didn't need volume, but because there was no safe answer. Only different flavors of exposed. Gregory opened his mouth, closed it. Legal shifted uncomfortably. One of the senior attorneys leaned in, clearly scrolling through shared documents like he might find some golden clause that would let them off the hook with a shrug. No one spoke. Then the door opened. Jared. He walked in like he still had permission to exist, tablet in hand, expression already defensive. His shirt was tight across the chest. He'd either bulked up or bought the wrong size in a rush to look assertive. He wasn't on the call invite. No one asked him to join, but he was here. Sorry to interrupt, he said, taking the empty seat next to Gregory, uninvited. I believe this is about the restructuring of vendor access. That was part of a larger ops modernization strategy we initiated last week. Legacy clearance overlaps were creating unnecessary friction. His tone was smug, confident, like he was pitching a feature on a startup demo day. He used the word friction like it was a sin and right-sizing like a blessing. But no one was buying it, not in that room. Reed didn't blink. He didn't even acknowledge Jared with a nod. He just asked the next question like a scalpel. So your firm unilaterally removed the designated signatory on a $50 million contract without written consent? Silence. Absolute, bludgeoning silence. No one typed, no one clicked, no one blinked. It wasn't a question, not really. It was an accusation wrapped in protocol. Gregory tried to salvage something, voice low and trembling at the edges. We didn't, this was an internal transition, not a contractual decision. Jared wasn't aware. Reed tilted his head, interrupting without a word. The gesture alone stopped Gregory mid-sentence. We are not discussing internal politics, Reed said. You're discussing contractual violation. This isn't a question of who knew what, it's a matter of what was done. He clicked again. The document on screen zoomed in, showing the missing signature chain. My name listed, my role vacant, the timestamp of my removal, no corresponding email, no countersigned document, no replacement listed. Just a procedural cliff, and Jared had driven the entire firm off it without a seatbelt. The head of legal exhaled through her nose like someone had just released a pressure valve inside her skull. She knew exactly how bad this was. You don't miss procedural sign-offs on flagship clients. You don't alter roles without dual-verified backups. And you never, ever leave Axiomex in the dark about changes tied to their money. Reed closed the document and looked back into the camera. As of now, all scheduled payments are frozen. If we do not receive corrected documentation and an audit-ready incident report within 72 hours, we will be forced to escalate under Clause 11F. Jared squinted. What is Clause 11F? This time, Reed did blink, once, slowly. The kind of blink you'd give a toddler who just asked why knives are sharp. It gives us the right, he said evenly, to pause the partnership, launch a third-party audit, and reevaluate the risk value of Westhelm as a strategic vendor. Gregory's hand went to his tie. Legal typed furiously. Jared just stared, mouth half open. The bomb had landed. No fire yet, but the silence, that was the fuse hissing. The call didn't end with a bang. It ended with a slow fade, like a light dimming in a room full of people trying not to panic. Reed Kaplan, the Axiomex lawyer, closed his laptop without a single word of goodbye. Just a click. Then his square went dark. And that was it. No recap, no hand-holding. Just a smoldering crater of silence where a $50 million partnership used to sit. Gregory looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The silk in his tie suddenly looked cheap. His mouth hung open for a moment too long before he snapped it shut and turned, not to legal, not to compliance, but to Jared. Why didn't we file the transition form? He asked, low and clipped. Jared, still seated like he belonged there, lifted his hands. It was an internal personnel matter. She was terminated for cause. Legal flinched at the word, cause. It always hangs in the air like it needs a lawyer to bless it. I didn't need external permission to manage my own team, Jared added, and this time there was a note of defensive heat in his voice. We're talking about one account, one transition that it failed to cascade properly. We can walk this back with the right language. Stop talking, Gregory said, just like that, flat, sharp, quietly lethal. The general counsel leaned forward then, laptop reflecting in his glasses. Clause 11F, sir, doesn't just pause payments. If they invoke it, they have the right to reassess our entire contract slate. They could yank not just the next quarter, but the entire renewal cycle. Another board member chimed in. That's 2/3 of our projected recurring revenue this year. Jared's face turned pink, then red. He opened his mouth again, but this time legal beat him to it. We have no written record of reassignment. We have no confirmation to the client. No dual authenticated replacement on file. No elevation request. No countersignature. This wasn't just a clerical oversight. This was a breach of protocol on a legacy client, and the trail leads directly to ops. Ops. Jared. Gregory's voice dropped lower than I'd ever heard it. I want your access restricted immediately. Strip his override credentials, effective now. Jared, you're suspended from operational authority for the remainder of the quarter. You'll coordinate with HR on a revised scope. Jared looked stunned. Wait, Gregory, this is non-negotiable, the general counsel said before Gregory could even finish the sentence. Jared stood up too quickly. His chair scraped the floor. The Zoom call was still live. Half the board frozen mid-blink, some with cameras off but definitely still listening. No one said a word to defend him, not one voice. He stormed out of the room, muttering something about scapegoats and CYA politics, but no one followed. No one had to. They all knew the truth. He'd kicked out the wrong person. And now the house was bleeding from a wound he couldn't even see coming. Back in my kitchen, I watched the participant list shrink as the board began to sign off, one by one. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. But I felt something shift inside me, the scales tipping. The silence I'd been carrying for days finally settling into something that felt like clarity. And then my phone buzzed, unknown number, text message. Hi Linda, this is Kari from Axiomex, Director of Ops. Are you free for a quick call today? I stared at the message for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Kari and I had spoken maybe a dozen times over the years. Always efficient, always professional. We'd solved more vendor snags together than I could count. She once called me the only reason West Elm doesn't light itself on fire once a quarter. I typed back, sure, I'm home all day. 30 seconds later, the phone rang. Kari's voice was calm, steady, laced with that undercurrent of urgency you only hear when something is off the rails and the clock is ticking. Linda, she said, I'm going to be blunt. This whole situation is a mess, and frankly, we're not sure how deep it goes. I've already pulled the correspondence logs, the signature history, and the vendor-side automation scripts. Your name is everywhere. You didn't just run the account. You built the entire operational trust model around it. I stayed quiet. Let her talk, we need help, she said. I want to bring you on, consulting, short-term, whatever you're comfortable with. We'll pay top of market and you'll report directly to me. I need someone who knows where the bones are buried. I could hear the tension in her breath, not fear, just urgency. A woman who knew the house was on fire and needed someone who knew how the damn wiring worked. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just asked one question. Do you want to start? She didn't hesitate. Today. I looked out the window, the sun slicing between the blinds like golden shrapnel. Maybe today wasn't about revenge. Maybe it was about clarity. And finally, about being seen for what I actually did, not what someone like Jared thought I was worth. The call was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. At 1:55, I sat down at my kitchen table, wiped a smear of jelly from the surface. Leftover from a breakfast I barely remembered eating, and opened my laptop. The Zoom link loaded clean. No buffering, no glitches. It felt surgical, like everything leading up to this had been prepped in sterile conditions. I clicked join and waited. 4 people were already in the room. Kari, Director of Ops, with that familiar half-smile and hair pulled into the same no-nonsense bun I remembered from vendor summits. Rajiv, Axiomex's internal compliance lead. Buttoned up, sharp-eyed, the type who doesn't blink unless it's in policy. A woman named Stephanie from Legal, who I didn't recognize, and a soft-spoken guy named Leon from Enterprise Risk who looked like he'd been awake for 24 hours straight on nothing but espresso and quiet dread. Kari opened the meeting like we were old colleagues, not former partners across the firewall. Linda, thank you for joining. We really appreciate your time. I nodded. Of course, I read the brief you sent over. She smiled, then clicked something off-screen. My name populated on the shared window. Not my resume, not my LinkedIn. A flowchart, timestamps, labels. System log excerpts with my credentials attached to every major compliance checkpoint for AXM 50078A, Axiomex's vendor account with West Elm. Just so you're aware, Kari said, we ran a full internal audit the moment the wire bounced. Pulled every piece of correspondence, every sign-off trail, every login and escalation script tied to your credentials over the last 2 years. Rajiv chimed in. You had 97% compliance integrity on all tasks related to the contract. That's above our internal team average. He wasn't reading from notes. That number was memorized. Your vendor failover script, Kari added. Flawless. Even flagged the issue on our end before legal saw it. If the protocol had been followed properly on their side, we wouldn't be in this mess. I didn't say anything. I just watched as my own digital footprint was laid bare like an archaeological dig. Clean layers, precisely dated, methodically built. Stephanie leaned in. We also reviewed internal correspondence from West Elm's team about your termination. None of it indicates they understood the contractual role you occupied. Leon exhaled. It's almost like they fired their own firewall and didn't realize until the breach alarm went off. I felt something shift in my spine. Not pride, not arrogance. Just the slow return of gravity to a body that had been floating in disorientation for days. Linda, Kari said, tone softening, we'd like to bring you in on a short-term advisory contract. We want your help reviewing our current vendor vulnerability model. Clearly, what we had in place wasn't enough. And frankly, we'd sleep better knowing you were the one telling us where the cracks are. I looked at the screen. 4 faces, all waiting, not pressuring, just waiting. I could have smiled. I could have leaned back and savored the moment. I could have asked for a ridiculous rate and watched them agree. But I didn't because it wasn't about leverage anymore. It wasn't about Jared or Westhelm or revenge. It was about being heard, trusted, used for what I actually knew, not just for the role someone else thought I fit into. What's the scope? I asked. Initial review of all high-value vendor onboarding and offboarding workflows, Rajiv said, with recommendations for automation logic, personnel redundancy, and compliance audit triggers. 2-week contract, remote 5-figure flat rate. Kari smiled. And if it works out, we're happy to discuss something longer. I didn't need time to think. Let's do it. Kari nodded. Send the paperwork this afternoon. And just like that, the thing Jared thought he'd destroyed became the reason another company was now asking me to rebuild. Not from scratch, but better, safer, cleaner. The call wrapped with polite goodbyes, nothing flashy, no back patting. But as I clicked leave meeting, I caught one last thing, a small line Rajiv had typed in the shared doc under my name, operational integrity, reinstated. I closed the laptop, sat back in my chair, and let the quiet return. Not the silence of dismissal, the calm of being seen, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself anymore. The board meeting was called for 7:30 a.m., earlier than usual, earlier than polite. It showed up in inboxes with the kind of subject line that doesn't just whisper urgency, it screams fire. Subject, emergency session axiomex escalation / contractual breach, review no coffee, no warm-up banter. No hope everyone's doing well, just a cold open. Legal was already mid-presentation when the stragglers joined. The slides weren't polished. They weren't meant to be, they were evidence. Redacted emails, system logs, HR forms. The Slack exchange where Jared typed just cut her loose at 8:12 a.m. last Tuesday. The timestamp on the vendor failover alert. Calendar reminder he ignored titled. Signatory change requires dual approval Axum 50078A. The new associate from legal, Marina, fresh from 3 years in contract litigation, spoke with clinical precision. No editorializing, no finger-pointing, just the dry, devastating facts. The termination of Miss Maddox without documented reassignment of her signatory responsibilities or communication with Axiomex constitutes not only a procedural failure under Westhelm policy, she said, clicking to the next slide, but also a contractual violation of the Axiomex Master Agreement, specifically Sections 7b and 11f. The air in the room tightened. Jared sat 3 seats away from Gregory, arms crossed, pretending his foot tapping wasn't audible through the table. Marina continued. Additionally, our review has uncovered a secondary clause buried in Appendix C, which appears to have been added during the 2021 amendment cycle. It states, she turned and read directly from the screen. In the event of a primary signatory's removal without named successor within 5 business days, the client reserves the right to initiate a vendor risk reevaluation, including but not limited to review of service integrity, personnel credibility, and potential termination of vendor partnership with cause. A full beat of silence, then another. Gregory looked like he'd been sucker punched by the fine print. So they can pull the plug? He asked quietly. They can, Marina replied. And if they do, our reputation as an enterprise vendor suffers an immediate and measurable hit. We've already been flagged in 2 industry compliance watch lists since yesterday. One of the board members, the kind who rarely spoke unless it involved investor relations, cleared his throat. Do we have any defenses? Marina shook her head. There was no redundancy plan, no transition file, no legal sign-off, no client notification. No post-termination review, there is no defense. Gregory turned toward Jared. The silence between them wasn't heated, it was frigid. The kind of cold that forms between men when one finally sees the other for what he is. Jared still tried to rally. He straightened in his chair, voice measured. This is being blown out of proportion. Linda's removal was based on documented friction. She was obstructing new workflows. She refused to adapt. Marina cut in, the first time her tone shifted from neutral. She had a 98.4% task completion rate on Axiomex operations. Her system access logs showed no obstruction, no flaggable delays. She authored the original compliance binder for that account. The only obstruction here is the one you caused by skipping protocol. The phrase hung there like a noose. Gregory looked down at his notepad, then up, then leaned forward, speaking more to the board than to Jared. My hands are tied. The client's money is paused. The reputational damage has already begun. We cannot absorb further exposure with this level of negligence under active review. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. He looked like a man doing damage control on a fire he didn't even see start. As of this morning, he said, Jared Munro is placed on administrative leave, pending outcome of the internal investigation into contractual breach and vendor integrity mismanagement. There was no vote, no objection, just nods, quiet, miserable nods. Jared started to rise from his seat. Greg, you are not to contact the client. You are not to speak to your former team. HR will coordinate with legal regarding next steps. This is no longer in your hands. Jared's face flushed, jaw clenched. But he sat down again hard. He knew, even if his mouth wouldn't say it, his body understood. The house was burning, and he'd been caught holding the match. The rest of the meeting turned toward mitigation. PR statements, temporary account reassignment, internal morale damage control, but it was all mop-up now. The mistake had already been made, the name removed, the clause triggered. And the woman Jared thought he'd erased from the board? She was already on a different call with his client, writing the playbook for how not to let this happen again. The final call was set for 10 o'clock a.m. sharp, no flexibility. The calendar invite didn't say discussion. It didn't say remediation. It said Resolution Review Axiomex Council, which in corporate terms translates to decisions made, now sit down and take your medicine. There were fewer people on camera this time. Most of the board had their feeds off. One even called in from a muted phone line. The kind of presence that means I'm here but I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. Gregory was present. Pale, pulled tight, hands folded like a schoolboy waiting for the principal to read his suspension notice. The general counsel sat to his left, HR to his right. Jared's seat was empty, permanently. At 10:01, the Axiomex lawyer appeared. Reed Kaplan again, unflinching. Shirt perfectly pressed, tie the same dark blue as the last meeting, as if this entire ordeal had been pre-scheduled down to his wardrobe. He didn't bother with greetings. He opened with a screen share, one document, the wire rejection log same as before, date, time, error code, signatory missing. Then he minimized it and looked directly into the camera, eyes sharp enough to cut through Gregory's last shred of plausible deniability. Our payment, he began, was rejected. Again, per your agreement with us, who authorized the removal of a primary account signatory? Gregory's lips parted. For half a breath, it looked like he was going to answer. But the words didn't come. His jaw moved. His throat flexed. Then he exhaled and slowly closed his mouth, because there was no answer that wouldn't dig deeper, because everyone knew who authorized it, and because the man who did it wasn't there to defend himself. Reed didn't wait. He continued, voice smooth and toneless. Clause 11F has been triggered, effective immediately. Oversight of the Westhelm account is being transferred to our internal legal team, and all further payments are paused until we complete our vendor risk reevaluation. Not if, until. He clicked off the screen share. The call went quiet. Gregory gave a single nod. Not of agreement, not of acknowledgement, just submission. The kind that says we're done here. A second later, Reed disappeared from the screen. The board remained silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, their cameras blinked out like extinguished candles. The CEO was the last to leave the call, eyes still fixed on the corner of the screen where Jared's name had once sat. And just like that, it was over. No shouting, no red faces, no grand apologies or mea culpas. Just the quiet sound of capital walking away. 3 blocks from that building, I was already on my second lap around the city park, earbuds in, walking brisk like I had somewhere important to be. Because I did. Lunch, with Kari, Axiomex's director of ops. She wanted to meet in person, said she'd bring paperwork for the next stage of the consulting engagement. This time it wouldn't be short-term. As I neared the corner of 7th and Marlowe, I passed the lobby of my old office. Same tinted glass, same receptionist pretending to look busy, but something new caught my eye. A sign taped to the front doors. Notice, effective immediately, new security badge policy enforced. All access must be reissued by facilities. No legacy credentials permitted. Translation: Jared's purge had left the system wide open, and now they were scrambling to patch the holes. Retroactive compliance, duct tape dignity. I kept walking, didn't stop, didn't look back. My reflection caught faintly in the glass as I passed. No badge around my neck, no corporate lanyard, no company email. Just me, still standing, still moving. The sun broke through the clouds overhead, warm and sharp against my shoulders. I tucked my phone away and crossed the street. Lunch was waiting. And somewhere back in that boardroom, they were still calculating what it would cost to recover from a decision made in a fit of arrogance. A decision to clear my desk. Funny thing is, I didn't clear my desk. I cleared their balance sheet instead. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.